I love Pokemon. Pokemon Yellow was my first game I ever owned, like my own personal game. Pokemon Emerald was the first game I ever beat on my own without assistance from a friend or a relative. I've been avoiding talking about the Sword and Shield controversy for a while now, but it just gets brought up every single time there is news about the game. New gym lead is announced, but where's the National Dex? New Pokemon revealed, but where's the National Dex? New Nintendo Switch Lite announced, which looks awesome for people who haven't adopted a Switch yet, and even for myself as someone who's wanted a second Switch for a while. But where's the National Dex? I do realize at the end of the day, nothing that I say in this video will ever change the popular opinion. People are going to continue to do this, but I can't help but be a little bit confused by the entire situation. I thought we all understood that this was going to happen at some point. There are over 800 Pokemon in existence. I thought that we all understood that at some point, Pokemon Company or Game Freak was going to have to make a choice between creating more and more Pokemon and continually adding them and updating them for new games, even to the point where we're up to, 1,000 plus Pokemon, or just updating graphics, textures, and animations and models, and just trying to create the overall best experience possible. In order to do that second option, eventually, you're going to have to start cutting some Pokemon just because of the sheer number of Pokemon you have. Whether you want to admit it or not, from a production standpoint, at some point, if you keep adding Pokemon and continue to keep the previous Pokemon, you will eventually start sacrificing quality, because that does take development time to add even those old Pokemon with existing files. Pokemon Sword and Shield has the best visuals and animation in the entire series. That's just true. People have pointed out the tail whip animation is reused or double kick is reused, and hey, this is a future version of me who's editing this video right now. While I was looking for footage of them reusing double kick, I noticed that the animation literally is not reused. I don't know where that started. The double kick animation is new. It accomplishes the same effect that it does in every Pokemon game, which is just basically a PNG image of a foot going at the enemy, but it is not reused. Sure, you're gonna have some reused animations. Just because of the amount of moves and animations that are required for a game like this, you're going to have some reused animations, but that shouldn't take away from the updated animations and entirely new animations. Don't focus on something like tail whip or double kick, because at the end of the day, how frequently are you really going to be using tail whip? And tail whip is not an aggressive move. It's hard to improve this animation. What else do you want to do with tail whip? I know in the name it seems to imply that you actually hit the opponent with your tail, but that's not what tail whip does at all. All tail whip does is decrease the enemy's stats. The description of what the move actually does is the user wags its tail cutely, making an opposing Pokemon less wary and lowering their defensive stats. Double kick is more arguable, but the problem is there are so many Pokemon with the move double kick, you can't exactly animate a Pokemon to go ahead and do that move, right? Because you're going to need to animate every single Pokemon that does double kick in a significantly different way. And at the end of the day, the double kick animation does a decent enough job of getting across what's happening. At some point during the development of this game, the lead developer Masuda decided that the quality of the game was more important than updating old animations and models to fit into this game. And what I mean by that is adding in those old Pokemon, because they would need to be updated. And I agree with that philosophy. I want this game to be as good as possible. If that means we need to take away development time from adding in old Pokemon and instead focus on this game itself, I am all on board with that. And I would imagine that once you've decided that, hey, we're not going to be able to get all of the Pokemon in this game, instead of trying your best and getting in as many as possible, I think you would probably focus your direction on something else. So a statement that he said in the past was that, well, this game is going to focus on the Pokemon that should theoretically belong in this region if it was like a real world location. I'm all on board with that, because you've got lots of different terrain in the UK, or at least the Galar region. You've got mountains, you've got snowy areas, you've got lakes, you've got enough different biomes that you can get all different types of Pokemon. So you can pull from all kinds of things. It will be perfectly reasonable to see Onix. It will be perfectly reasonable to see dragon type Pokemon. It would be perfectly reasonable to see all the different types of Pokemon we want to see. So this region is chosen perfectly for that design. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of amazing memories trying to catch them all, but if I have to give up the post-game experience of trying to catch all 800 plus Pokemon, I'm completely for it if it means we're getting a better game at the end of the day. Especially because in Sword and Shield, I'm not giving up the catch 'em all experience. Sure, I don't have all of the Pokemon in history, but there's still that exact mission of collecting them all. Maybe not all of the Pokemon in existence, but all of the Pokemon in that region. And then of course you've got those older games where you do have the national dex and you can still go play them. And to be clear, we have no idea of how many Pokemon are actually being cut from Sword and Shield. I say cut, but that's really not the way we should be framing this. We have no idea which Pokemon they're not adding to Sword and Shield. I just wanted to mention that because I didn't want anyone thinking that there was going to be like 100 Pokemon in this game. We have no idea how many Pokemon there actually are going to be in this game. And I guess I'll bring this up now because it's as good a time as any. When this topic comes up, people often ask, well, why don't you just port all of the models from Sun and Moon? Well, for one, that's not even necessarily super easy. It's not as simple as copy and pasting a Word document. It does take time to port models. Models aren't just being ported to this game. The animations, I'm sure, are being updated. The models themselves, I'm sure, are being slightly adjusted, although it's really hard to tell because of the low resolution of the 3DS. But I would imagine some of them, if not most of them, have been modified in some way. And then there's the fact of just getting them all into the game. Even that's hard work, right? That's not just as simple as dragging and dropping files. Then there are new animation types that haven't been needed before. For example, in Sword and Shield, Pokemon appear in the overworld, which is a walking animation that you need to implement that wasn't previously there. Not just walking animations, but running animations too, because the trainer can whistle at Pokemon to have the Pokemon chase them. Overall, the world of Pokemon looks more lively than ever. For example, here's a Machoke in the wild. He sees you and then flexes at you. Granted, it's a modified version of his battle entrance animation, but it's still a nice piece of flavor that I wouldn't have expected on the next 3DS Pokemon game if we were still on 3DS. I'm not sure if that would have made the cut. In fact, I'm fairly certain it would not have made the cut if this game was going to have every single Pokemon in it. This concept of Game Freak being lazy is absolutely laughable. In an industry filled with crazy work hours and ridiculous crunch times, the last thing I would ever call any development team is lazy. That's not to say that there are crunch time problems at Nintendo. From what I can tell, Nintendo's not really harsh about the crazy work hours and ridiculous crunch times in the games industry. For example, they recently delayed Animal Crossing, I think. That was because they didn't want to force everyone into a crunch time. And along those same lines, people ask things like, well, why don't you just delay Pokemon Sword and Shield so that you can get every single Pokemon in the game? And I like that idea in theory, but in practice, you can't just delay a game like that. The difference with Animal Crossing and Pokemon is that very early on, Pokemon Sword and Shield has very clearly decided that we're not going to have every Pokemon in the game, so they've designed the game with that in mind. There's a difference between Animal Crossing being delayed to polish already established concepts than Pokemon Sword and Shield having to add in a bunch of stuff that was never intended to be in the game in the first place. Delaying a game isn't as simple as let's just keep working on the game. That's over 100 different Game Freak employees that need to be paid during that delayed process. That's a whole marketing team that needs to re-strategize their entire plan of what they're going to do during that time, which is very difficult because generally marketing strategies are planned very far in advance, so they would need to adapt very quickly. This isn't as important in Animal Crossing because they do a traditional sense of marketing for Animal Crossing, regular TV spots, but Pokemon marketing is much more concentrated. And then let's say, for example, they do delay this game. They delay it another 6 months or something, which is an absurd amount of time. That would cost Pokemon Company a lot of money. But let's say they do that, right? And they get all the Pokemon into this game with that 6 months of development time, which I'm not even sure would be possible, but let's just say that does happen. Well, now what do you do next game when you need to do the same thing? And then we want to update animations, we want to make the world more lively, and we want to add new Pokemon for a new generation on a new system. Well, then what? Game Freak has kept the catch-em-all concept intact for 23 years, which should be seen as a massive accomplishment, but there had to be a peak at some point, a point where Pokemon would have to start getting cut. Maybe 800 wasn't necessarily that peak, but with the new hardware demanding new animations, new effects, things like that, I think Game Freak, or Masuda, has chosen the perfect cutoff point. A difficult decision, but a decision that I believe is probably correct in the long run. This new direction of focusing on Pokemon that makes sense for the given region will result in better animation, better games, better effects, better everything, because each and every one of those Pokemon is development time. Just to sum things up really quickly, if you didn't previously realize that at some point Nintendo and the Pokemon Company were going to have to cut Pokemon, well, I say cut Pokemon, that's a bit disingenuous, but at some point they were going to have to stop including older Pokemon. If you didn't realize that, that's the world we live in. 800 unique new models that will all need unique animations, that will all need walking animations, that will all need all of this. It's too much. And that number of 800 is only going to continue to increase. By the end of this generation, it's probably going to be at 880 or something like that. Somewhere between 4 and 6 years from now, I'm sure we'll be over 1,000. Over 1,000. That is too many models. I question how many people genuinely played the Pokemon game specifically for the national dex and collecting all the Pokemon, but if that is truly who you are, Sun and Moon has a crazy national dex. So I'd recommend going and playing that. If you don't like Sun and Moon, well, maybe it could have been a better game if they had more development time. Like maybe if they didn't add all of those darn Pokemon, they would have had enough time to make the game even better. Anyway, that's it from me. If you're new around here, I'd appreciate you subscribing and leaving a like on this video. I don't normally talk about Pokemon, but this one was really bugging me, so I had to talk about it. My name has been Bilbsy, and I will see you in the next video.